Welcome back, folks, to the WP Tonic Show. This is episode 502. We've got a great guest with us. We've got Stephen Saunder with us from Zipfish. And the program's all going to be about hosting, general advice about hosting, why Stephen and his colleagues have entered the reasonably competitive sector of WordPress hosting, why he did it, what he hopes for his company. It should be a fantastic episode. And I also got my great co-host, Adrian. So let's start with Stephen. Stephen, can you give us a quick intro of yourself?
Yeah, my name's Stephen Saunder. I work with Zipfish.io. It's a hosting company that focuses on speeding up WordPress websites by focusing on not just fast servers, but also making sure that the code is running fast.
Right. And I've got my great co-host, Adrian. Adrian, would you like to introduce yourself to the new listeners and viewers?
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian. I am the CEO and founder of Groundhog. We help small businesses launch their marketing funnels.
That's great. And before we go into the main part of the show, I'd just like to talk quickly about our two sponsors. First of all, Kinsta, another WordPress hosting company. We've been with them for about 2 years plus. They are, like I say, WordPress only hosting. They have been fantastic company, not only as a sponsor, but as a company hosting our site. Really very quick. Great interface, custom interface that's a joy to use, and really great 24/7 support. When you send a ticket to them, you normally get a reply in minutes. You normally deal with the same person. You're not passed around the organization having to repeat about 4 to 5 times what your problem is, which in the end can get very time consuming and basically a bit annoying. You're normally dealt by the person that first spoke to you. They're just a joy to work with. So if that sounds interesting for yourself or for your clients, go over to kinsta.com and look at their plans. Maybe sign up for one. And the main thing, if you can just tell them through Twitter or through their ticketing system that you heard about them through WP Tonic, that would be great. Our sponsor is a new sponsor, but they've sponsored the show before and they're a real friend of the show, and that's WP Fusion. Now, WP Fusion is a really amazing product. If you've got WooCommerce, if you've got any kind of shopping cart environment, you've got a learning management system, and if you want to connect that with a CRM, either an internal WordPress one like Groundhog or external ones like ActiveCampaign, they really enable you to do that on steroids. And the amazing kind of automation you can do with a WordPress website with WP Fusion and one of these other CRMs is just it's just amazing. It's a really mature product now. It connects to over 200 CRMs now and other marketing automation platforms. So it's just mind-boggling. And they've got really fantastic help documentation and other information to get you up and running really quickly. So I suggest for yourself or for clients, you go over to WP Fusion and see what they've got to offer. It's the way of the future, so you don't want to be behind the curve, really. So, Stephen, so why have you decided to go into hosting, and especially WordPress specific hosting? Because in 2020, it's quite a competitive area, Stephen.
Yeah, it's a very competitive area. It seems like there are thousands of hosting companies out there that are doing just like straight hosting or managed WordPress hosting. But working it with and in several agencies and just being a WordPress developer for quite a few years, there was always this big frustration with the current setup of WordPress hosting environments, because as WordPress has grown, the challenge of figuring out exactly what's going on has become more and more complex. And so it felt like there was always these situations where you weren't 100% sure if it was like a plugin's fault, if it was the hosting provider's fault, especially when you start talking about dynamic data. And and then translating that into WordPress speed, like how to make your WordPress site fast. And there's just so much going on. And it seems like most hosting providers today are focused primarily on their server stacks. So like, what's the hardware? What is, what type of Linux is being run? What packages are installed? And when you focus on that, that's only 50% of the equation, right? You're also running a bunch of code on top of that, right? WordPress, the plugins, your theme, custom add-ons that you've, hacked together. And when you only focus on the servers, you're missing out on like this huge component of stuff that needs to actually happen, right? The business end of stuff. And so we wanted to hop into this space to kind of solve both ends of the equation, to build a hosting company that doesn't just care about putting your site on really fast servers and making sure the servers are stable, but also making sure that your code is running really fast and your code is stable, and living in both of those spaces and bridging both of those together.
Yeah, I follow the logic, and my only question is, where does the boundary then, or maybe it's a boundary that moves constantly, so it's maybe this is why this is hard to pin down. Where's the boundary between the responsibility of the client and the developers that they hire, or if they think they can do it themselves, and the hosting provider? Or is that an understandable divide, but in reality, a very tricky divide?
Yeah, it is a tricky divide, and it's a divide that has to happen like on a case-by-case basis. But when I know that it takes both sides of that equation to make it work, you need to be able to span both of those, right? If I just say, hey, it's a plugin on your site, go figure it out, like that's not super helpful. But if I can say, hey, it's this plugin, this is causing the problem, but here are 2 other plugins that will do the same exact thing, but will solve your issue. Or let me change the caching structure on your WordPress site, and then that will solve the issue. Like, there's just so many things that go on, and it seems like all the hosting companies that I've ever worked with in the past, and were my source of frustration with like the current status of hosting, is that there's just a lot of finger pointing, or they try to get you out of their queue as fast as possible to move on to like the next thing that they're working on.
Yeah, and we're going to discuss maybe why, some of the reasons for that and why that has happened. I'm going to put it over to my co-host, Adrian.
Yeah, so I was perusing through your site, and obviously the call to action and the, what was the word I'm looking for? The main benefit, the main selling point is, if I scroll down about halfway here, it's all about the page speed.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that you're using like the Google speed test in order to quantify the page speed. And you have like WP Engine, Flywheel, SiteGround, and then Zipfish, which is a very impressive 1.2 second load time. I'm curious because I've never really like believed, quote unquote, that especially if you're like a branded company, that page speed is like the be all and end all of a successful site. So I'm wondering, number one, how reliable is like GTmetrix and PageSpeed in order for actually categorizing, how fast your website and how much it affects your ranking if on Google and stuff like that? And 2, is it the be and end all for like all sites, everywhere, that if they have a page speed longer than X amount of seconds, that they're going to lose like X amount of their traffic? Can you lend any insight on that?
Yeah, for sure. So, as far as SEO stuff, I feel like there's like a lot of misinformation out there about page speed and SEO. Everybody's like, oh, Google's ranking, your page speed or calculating your page speed and using that to determine what your rank is from an SEO perspective. And that's true to like some extent, but it's like a really small number. But what affects your rank in Google much higher is if people are bouncing from your site. And so if your page speed is slow and people are bouncing from your site because your page speed is slow, it's taking a long time for people to load, like whether it's the initial link click or they get to your homepage and they click somewhere else and it's taking a while for the next page to load, so they just bail on it. That's what's going to impact your SEO a lot more than
really. So it's not so much like how fast your website actually is, but it's if people can't get to your site and them interacting with your site, that is like a side effect of like a slow website.
90% of people fall into that category. Like there are people that fall into like, your page speed is taking 15 seconds to load and Google will ding you for that and you'll lose SEO ranking. But if you're like in a normal window, like your SEO score is not going to change that much based on your page speed, except for
what's like a normal window.
I would say somewhere, it really depends like what you're trying to do, right? If you like have a big heavy web app and all your other competitors have these heavy web apps that they're trying to load, like you have a little bit bigger area, like a bigger grace area. Right. But I would say somewhere between the 2 to 5 second window, like 5 second, like pushing it up like pretty far. But if you can fall in there, like we haven't seen that impacting somebody's SEO score at all. But the bounce rate does matter. And here's where like a lot of people, I think what they don't think about is that somebody does an initial Google search and they're looking for a solution to their problem. There's a couple different like methodologies that people kind of fall into. Either like they click a bunch of links at one time and open up a bunch of tabs because they're like, I need to figure this out. I'm going to look at a bunch of this at once. And if any one of those tabs takes longer to load, they'll just close out of that and move on to the next tab. And there's a lot of also people who fall into the category where they'll click on the first one. If it doesn't feel like it loads within 3 seconds, they'll hop back to the homepage. And that's been a pretty well documented number by Google themselves, by a bunch of different marketing firms. There's been like a lot of research that has been done on this, that your amount of people that bounce off of a page or never actually land on your homepage because you're taking more than 3 seconds is significant. Like that's kind of the significant like line that gets drawn in the sand. And as you go up, it becomes greater and greater. And as you go down, it goes less and less. Now, once you're down to like the 2 second level, shaving off, 0.5 seconds is not going to change very much. Like it's kind of like the law of diminishing return, right? Like as you go down the spectrum, another half second, another second doesn't matter as much. But if you're up in like the 7 or 8 second window, shaving off 1 second of load time will have a much bigger impact.
So when you mentioned like running heavy web apps, which kind of nicely segues into what a lot of people are using WordPress these for, is installing the big platform plugins, stuff like membership, stuff like LMS. WooCommerce is known for being a little bit of a resource hog. And you start installing all of those other plugins that loads all of the external like GTmetrix scripts and the Stripe scripts and all of this stuff, and you start to get bloated WordPress heavy websites that do all of these different things, right? Versus kind of just like a static blog where you just upload content once a day or whatever, and it's just like super nice and super easy. What level or how does caching really play a role in making those sites faster, and how much can you reasonably expect to actually improve the performance of those kinds of websites, and how much does it really matter?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is definitely like an opinionated statement, but this is kind of where we fall. As long as your marketing and front-facing pages are fast, what happens after somebody is sold on your product or has created an account on your product matters a lot less. So if you are engaging in a learning management system and it takes 5 seconds to load a page, somebody will tolerate that 5 second load time a lot more than if it was their first initial visit and they were landing on your homepage. And this is really where like we sit in like looking at people's individual sites, how they have them set up, the code that's being ran, is because it's important to cache like that homepage or those landing pages, things that don't have like all these crazy high dynamic content that's happening, because that's where the sale is going to be made. That's where that page speed matters. And then once after you get past that, it doesn't matter as much. But when you're on a hosting company that's like either your caching is on or your caching is off, like that's a very binary choice that you don't really want to sit in. Because if you can cache some of your pages, but not all of your pages, like that's where you can really start talking about this hybrid between what the server is doing and what your code is doing, and really working on making sure that the pages that matter that load fast are loading fast, and the business pages that are doing all this functionality stuff where you have to be able to load this dynamic information. You have to be able to redirect and block users from doing certain things or allowing them to do things. Some of that stuff you can't cache, and there's only so much you can do from a speed standpoint. But as far as like how much that speed matters, it's diminished quite a bit. And so when we're working with a company and speeding up their website, we're looking at like, what does it take to get somebody from the entrance point to the sales page, make that as fast as possible, and then address those dynamic pages. Like, how can we speed the dynamic pages, but also keep them dynamic so they don't completely fall apart?
Right. So it's just really about making the entry points fast. And once they're in, it doesn't, it's like you mentioned, diminishing returns, and it's not so, important that your lesson page with a Vimeo video takes like 7 seconds to load because they've already bought the page.
to a certain point. I mean, if you're taking, 7 seconds to load, like that could be really frustrating for your users. Yeah. I mean, it all depends what's going on. If you're loading some crazy thing like Asana, right? Like that takes a while to load, but you're getting like all this like utility value from it. So you're willing to sit there a little bit longer, and it has to take a while to load because there's a lot of information that goes in there. That's just a non-WordPress example, but
I just have a really, really quick one last question before we go for a break and Jonathan takes back over. When it comes to caching and websites and whatnot, really when they do it, it's based on the speed of the internet that Google has, which is basically like an indefinite, like massive fiber optic cable capable of like teleporting you from here to Mars in the blink of an eye. But most of us don't have fiber optic, super 100 up, 100 down internet access. So how much of the speed is the website, and how much of it is actually just your internet connection not being super blazing fast?
Yeah, if you load something on Google PageSpeed and it's a pretty well-known site that gets a decent amount of traffic, it'll show you like real world where people fall. So you can get some real world stats on like how long it's taking people to access your site and what's going on there. The lighter a site can be, the better off you always are, right? Like the less data that has to be loaded, the better. And so it's all about trying to figure out how do you delay data from being loaded that doesn't need to be loaded, or how do I reduce the amount of requests that need to happen, or the amount of kilobytes from whatever, like a plugin that's loading all sorts of things that you don't need. Like for instance, like WooCommerce automatically loads tons of scripts and CSS styles on pages that never use WooCommerce. And there's some really simple things you can do to like prevent that from happening. But by default, that's what happens out of the box. And if you don't know about that, or you don't know how to limit that, right, it's going to be more kilobytes. And so then whether you're on a fast or slow connection, the less kilobytes that have to be loaded, the better off.
That makes sense. All right.
All right, folks, we're going to go for our break. We'll be back with Stephen Saunders and discussing hosting and how to make your site quicker in the second half of the show. We'll be back in a few moments. We're coming back. We've had a pretty good initial discussion about hosting and some of the factors you've got to take for yourself and for your clients around getting decent hosting for your website. Now, Stephen, have you got any kind of quick insights, tricks? People, how important is it to choose the right initial stack, i.e. the right theme, the right page builder, and the plugins? And it's a bit like the Wild West. It always has been. That's been one of the attractions of WordPress, isn't it? It's one of the attractions, and one of the problems with it is how can you see if you're choosing the right plugins and they're not really having a very detrimental effect on your speed of your website, Stephen?
So what I like to tell people is when you're going in to build a website, get the like base plugins and themes that you are planning on using. Install all of those and then run it against Google PageSpeed, see what happens. Also run something that just has like WordPress out of the box, the default installation that comes, and see what the difference is. And then as you decide to add plugins, like just keep running it, keep monitoring it. GT Metrics has a great tool that will run every 24 hours and kind of track where your site is from a speed standpoint. It's really about just following what's happening with your site, thinking about what you're adding. And when you add something, check to see what the speed implication is, and then maybe make a choice that is faster or not. And Google has a lot of resources out there. If you just search like, if you're looking for a slider plugin, if you just Google, like WordPress fastest slider plugin, you would get some great results and some really helpful articles saying like what you should use or shouldn't use. But just kind of monitoring that and just keeping an eye out for that. And being ready to adjust if all of a sudden the numbers like shoot up.
Right, because also the amount of plugins, because I think depending on the site, and this is very variable, but from personal experience, I think it is quite easy to get between 50, 60, 70 plugins on a website in 2020. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen lots of sites with like 40 plus plugins, and really it's not the number of plugins you have. Oftentimes, actually, in my opinion, like the more plugins you have is sometimes better, because you aren't getting this like one size fit all plugin that's loading tons of stuff. You're saying, okay, what are like the actual things I need, and then finding those plugins that solve that one problem. There's a lot of talk about like plugin bloat and people having too many plugins, but as long as you're being thoughtful and responsible about it, I don't think that the number of plugins actually has a huge correlation to do with site speed as the quality of plugins. So if you're getting, if you're downloading plugins from some random place on the web and it's not in the WordPress directory or not built by a reputable WordPress developer, there's a lot of baggage that can come along with those plugins, and that will infinitely decrease your site speed compared to adding 4 or 5, reputable plugins. So it's not the number; it's like it has a lot more to do with the quality of the plugins that you're running.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Over to you, Adrian.
So from the plugin conversation, I think there's a natural segue to the theme conversation. Now, I'm sure you've seen people use like the most obscure themes and then some of the most popular themes. I'm wondering if you have any sort of, list or tier of maybe the more popular ones that are make a really fast website happen, and some of them maybe out there that you should avoid if speed is exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, themes also are like a lot more tricky to switch out. If you find you have a slow plugin, like you can usually find something else that will do something similar. But like if you're switching out a whole theme, like that's a
3-day, 4-day process of like reformatting content and changing options and replacing the logos, and that's a much more painful process.
So much more painful. So getting that right is important. My advice to people is that if you're using a page builder, look at that page builder and see what themes they recommend, because generally those themes are quite a bit lighter than themes that you can find off the shelf, because they are tailored built for those page builders, and there's not all this superfluous stuff that they've added on in their own custom page builder and stuff. I like to stay away from themes that include page builders. Like if you can find a theme, the less the theme has to do, the better off you are, especially as we're moving into this whole new Gutenberg world where you're going to be able to change and edit theme styles or global styles.
We've come a long way from like the all-in-one real estate theme.
Yeah, exactly.
If you remember, if anybody remembers, it came with the directory and it came with the IDX integration and the form and the searching, and we've come a long way from those.
The more all-in-one theme that you have, the more all-in-one themes there are, it seems like the worse they become. Like
actually, you'd be surprised. I don't think we have as much as you think, Adrian, because like last week on my other business, I was talking to the CEO of IDX Broker, which has about 13,000 real estate agent clients, and works with developers to use IDX in a WordPress environment, but they provide the data. And sometimes I think we're in as WordPress professionals or making our living out of WordPress. We live in a little bit of a bubble, and the real world hasn't changed as much as we think. But that's maybe just my opinion. Sorry to interrupt, Adrian.
No worries. Yeah, it's I guess it makes sense, if in the context of real estate to bundle in that sort of stuff for specific things. Although I think I know IDX Broker has a plugin, so maybe it's a little bit different. I don't know, but
they provide a lot on their developer community who have a tight relationship with IDX Broker, but they also provide out of from the website a number of themes. So you can, if you're a venturous individual, you could try and set it up all yourself. But most people are probably going to use one of the developers.
I'll qualify my statement to say we've come a long way, technically.
Yes, yes. It's
from the technology standpoint and the products of the vast range of availability of different products to choose from, we've come a long way.
And as the person supporting WordPress clients, I just feel, for obvious reasons, it's understandable reasons. I think sometimes we do end up in a little bit of a bubble as a WordPress community, and most people outside that don't know anything about Gutenberg and really don't want to know anything about it, and really don't really understand automation, or they just want a solution.
Let's not to hijack the conversation from Stephen.
No, sorry about that. I'm ranting on a bit, and I
think you have a really good point that just as people look into themes that, we've kind of already talked about this, but the more all-in-one, the more features something has, the heavier it gets. So only get the features that you need, and you're probably in a good position.
We're going to wrap up the podcast part of the show. In the bonus content, I'm going to be asking Stephen about the business logic around choosing this area to try and build a WordPress business in, some of the competitors, how he feels he can build his own brand in a competitive sector. It should be a fascinating discussion, which you can see on the WP Tonic YouTube channel or on the WP Tonic website, with a full set of transcripts and links. And I think he's got a slight giveaway for the audience, haven't you, Stephen?
Yeah, we got a promo code. They'll get you 25% off your first 3 months of zipfish.io.
And I'll make sure that's all in the show notes. That's a very generous offer to the WP tribe. So, Stephen, what's the best way of finding out more about you and your company?
Yeah, head over to zipfish.io. You can read about everything that we do, our guaranteed page speed score, how we optimize sites, how we look at the servers and your code to make sure everything's running as fast as possible.
Right. And Adrian, what's the best way for people finding out more about you and your company?
You can go to groundhog.io with 2 Gs to find our free plugin, and that will help you with your CRM and your marketing automation.
Right. And I want to talk about our webinar. We had our first webinar with Spencer Forum about building really great shopping carts and funnels in general. And we had over 50 people sign up for the first webinar. It was a blast. We're going to do our second webinar on Tuesday, the 9th of July. It's always going to be the first Tuesday of the month. And so that's the 9th of July, and that's going to be at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's going to be up today, where you can go to the WP Tonic website and sign up for that. It's right in the top menu, and it says free webinar. So click that and sign up. And basically, we're going to be talking about shopping carts again, but also marketing automation, using probably Groundhog and also WP Fusion combined, and how you can use those two products with a modern shopping cart and try and get more customers to buy your products. That's not a bad idea, is it? We'll be back next week with another great guest. We'll see you soon, folks. See you soon. Bye. Right, Stephen. So, branding and getting your message. Who do you think your target audience is? Is it a bit like the people that signed up for Cloudware, but it's Cloudware with more personal support? Is that the kind of model you're looking at?
I would say our model is. Are you saying Cloudways or?
Yeah, Cloudways. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say no. Our model is much more. What people are looking for is servers that run their site well and that are fast, right? Like at the end of the day, that's what people care about, is that their website is stable and that their website is running as fast as possible. And there's a lot of companies in the space that have some really awesome server stacks. But when it comes down to what you're actually running on your WordPress installation, there's not a lot of WordPress hosting companies that will roll up their sleeves and get into what is actually going on. Like when we take on a site and migrate it over to our platform, we actually just go through all of the plugins. We go through the database. We look at all the custom code that's been added, your theme, and just see where can we streamline things. What queries are taking forever to run? What are the unnecessary JavaScript or CSS files that are being loaded? It's this much more holistic approach to WordPress hosting than a lot of companies out there are doing right now.
All right, because it's really interesting and also extremely difficult to find that sweet spot where your product is viable financially, but it's also it's different to the competition. You found your differential, your main differential, and that's hard to find, isn't it, Stephen? It's a bit. We were talking about like before we went live, like Flywheel. I think before they were bought up by WP Engine, I think they had been quite successful in finding their differential and their sweet spot, which was selling to graphic designers that wanted some additional income, and they could white label it and they could sell it to their clients, but then they still had the technical support of Flywheel. WP Engine, I think they have they're built up by their purchase of StudioPress, quite a following in the Genesis developer community, but also they tend to pitch themselves at the developer type as more technical than a more technical solution than some of their competitors. Do you think I'm resonating with you, or am I just waffling, Stephen?
No, yeah, that's definitely how those companies align their offerings. I would say that if you would take that, like your graphic designer example, I think like that's a space that we live in a lot more. Is we have, people who are doing like PPC agencies or graphic design agencies, or even people that just run their own WordPress site, and they want somebody on their side that does more than hosting, but that also understands the coding and development of stuff. So that
more than that, they want someone that understands their business.
Right. Like what are they trying to do? Like, what is their LMS system they have installed? Are they using like WP Fusion? Like all of these things, right? Like matter when you're talking about hosting and how to make something fast and stable and seamless. And because we started this company with roots in WordPress development, like 50% of the people that work for Zipfish are WordPress developers, 50% of the people are hosting people. And because we have like footing in both of those areas, we're able to solve some really interesting problems and not just tell customers like, hey, there's an issue with your plugin. It's like, well, there's an issue with your plugin. Let's fix it for you. Or there's an issue with how you're trying to do something, or with your caching, or with how you're trying to handle some sort of logic or WordPress query. We have the tools and the capabilities to fix that. And because we're on the hosting side, we're not in this place of like, oh, is it the hosting problem or is it the code's problem? Like we can see both of those things and what's going on there.
It's it's really a case of, from your service offering, it sounds like a case of you get what you pay for, because there's a lot of hosting companies that are doing like the $3 a month thing if you sign up for 12 months, and you're not in that. You're much further beyond that sort of like bargain level. This, I'm looking at the pricing. It's like $35 a month or $75 a month. I would equate that to kind of like that's the starting point for like premium Cloudways or like Kinsta, but even like those don't offer the level of, I guess, attention to detail in terms of speed that you're currently is built into the service offering. So good value, but not so like undervalued that this offering is not going to be able to live up with the promise.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is when we were like kicking around this business idea and like modeling it from like a financial standpoint, it's like, well, can we offer this level of support to people and still generate enough revenue from monthly
support? People cost money.
So much.
A lot of money.
Well, it's probably the most expensive thing. But what we found is that as we lean farther and farther into the support and into the code side of WordPress, we have now been able to build some efficiencies into the server side of things that have eliminated support tickets that you would oftentimes see, right? Because we have workflows and stuff for saying what pages need to be cached, what pages don't need to be cached. We now know what it looks like when somebody's are running, A, B, or C LMS systems or whatever sort of dynamic data needs to happen. Like we already have servers that are like tuned for that specific scenario, and we know what we're getting into. So that eliminates a lot of those support tickets and requests that I think most server companies are seeing right now.
I think what's missing from, because you don't actually run like a caching plugin when you're installed on your stack, right?
We do all the caching server side. So
server side, right?
There's no caching plugin.
So I think one of the, maybe an opportunity for the caching plugins that might be listening to this that are worried that, oh my God, our business is going to go away, is, as you mentioned, when you have those specific like technology stack scenarios, caching should be as easy as, I recognize that you have like WooCommerce installed. Click here to configure the caching system to be compatible with WooCommerce, instead of having to go through all of the freaking docs and tweaking all of the specific pages. Like, it should just know.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you're using like the tiny cart thing in the, I forget what they exactly call it in WooCommerce, escaping me, but like where there's like the cart, Ajax cart, on every page.
The icon in the menu.
Right. Exactly. Like,
yeah,
that drops down and shows everything in the cart. Like all of a sudden, like, all right, well now you can't cache that page because it's going to, it has to load some data in there. And a lot of times that causes some cache problems. But if you're not using that, now I can cache that page. And so it's like, is that option turned on? Is it not turned on? And you can automate all of that stuff. But you have to know what's happening on the code side to be able to actually make your servers line up with what's going on.
That's like such an interesting solution, is just having specific stacks to deal with those specific scenarios. That's just such an interesting solution to me, because that's not something I would have ever thought of. But yeah, that's just so cool.
I think about like WordPress is becoming this much more plug and play sort of thing, right? Like choose your whatever plugins and whatever you want to create, and you can create these like crazy amazing things. But like the server space has not gone that direction yet, and that's where we're trying to take it, right? Into this, you have this unique configuration, this is what you need. You have that unique configuration, you need this over here. Like Flywheel, everybody on the same exact kind of install, and you have to make all of these requests into their support to like change some like real basic things. But if you know that somebody's running WooCommerce, this is what you need to run WooCommerce. You're running WooCommerce and WP Fusion, this is what you need to do that. Or Groundhog.io, like this is how the server should respond to that.
It sounds like you're taking it a step further than something like Liquid Web, which does like the managed WooCommerce hosting specifically for WooCommerce. But not only are you doing WooCommerce, but for all of the other stacks out there as well, which is really, 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 really cool.
So would I be kind of like to jump in what Adrian's just said? Are you trying to find that sweet spot between something like Liquid Web and Pagely? You're trying to find a position in the middle between those, because like Pagely, they wouldn't want to speak for them, but I think they specialize in boutique solutions for companies that are having traffic levels which the majority of websites, 80-90% of websites never get, where Liquid Web, like what Adrian, they're trying to focus on WooCommerce. The other thing that surprised me when we interviewed Chris Lemmer a few weeks ago was that I had the impression that the hosting industry was dominated by two main players, but by going what Chris informed us, it's very much still a very fragmented industry with mostly dominated by small players. So was that one of the reasons why you chose to still enter it?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's really fragmented still, and there's still a lot of space in there. It is highly competitive, but there is space. And
there'll always be space for unique solutions that offer specific problems.
Which is why you see a lot of this fragmentation into boutique solutions, right? These like small little hosting companies that do something A, B, or C like really well, and that's what they focus on. Our move is to try to take that boutique kind of solution and be able to apply that to every website, right? Like, so instead of like company A being really good at WooCommerce, company B being really good at, I don't know, like Groundhog, or company C being really good at WP Fusion, company, whatever. We're saying like in today's cloud environment and world, like why can't we create the flexibility to be able to have servers that can respond to all of these unique needs that people have and not just create a one size fits all, which is why we see this fragmentation sort of going on. So like that's really the space that we're trying to live in and the problems that we're trying to solve.
So kind of continue the discussion a little bit is how long have you been running the company, and secondly, what's been the biggest surprise so far on your road to try and get this really established? What's the one thing that maybe sticks in your mind that you didn't envision when you first started trying to, I always think entrepreneurs are like alchemists. They're always trying to make base metals into gold. So what's been the biggest surprise so far on the journey?
Probably the biggest surprise is, I think I do a lot of customer facing stuff. Like that's my role, right? Is to like be in front of the customers and talk to customers.
Here we are.
Here we are. And just like how amazing and nice the WordPress community is, like not just like the people, not just like the developer world, because that's always been amazing and nice with like WP, like with WordPress meetups and stuff like that. But like people who are just like mom and pop shops that have built their own website and are just trying to figure out how to, sell their product online. They've bought hosting from who knows where, they, install the theme from whatever, and just working with those people. It's just been really cool seeing how great the community is that extends past the developer community, because that's the community that I was a part of for a long time. It's just like building and coding, but like going into like the actual people that are running the businesses and talking to those guys have been really fun and amazing. So that's been surprising.
Oh, well, that's very upbeat. So Adrian, you got a last question?
I don't. I didn't have time to think of a follow-up. But I guess the natural progression is, you've been running this for so long and, you're doing a great job. What's next? Is what next great improvement can we expect for site speed and improving the customer experience on websites from your hosting platform? Yeah,
so we've focused initially on site speed and making people's WordPress sites fast, because that's just like a very natural things that people are trying to solve. But what we found is that there are a lot of WordPress developers or specific setups that people want to have, like an agency. Like this is how I run my agency. These are the plugins that I install. And so we're trying to create a white label product right now that we should have done in about a month or so from now, where an agency can say like, hey, this is my unique situation and these are my unique situations for each client. We need a server platform or stack that works hand in hand with that, and not just, a large server to throw things on or an optimized server, but we want a server that's tuned to run the code. And we want you guys to also look at that code to make sure it's tuned and running as fast as possible and as smooth as possible. So we're really
like a niche agency who like only does like WooCommerce sites with these specific plugins installed and really providing them a service that fits those specific needs.
Yeah, exactly. Or like if I, sell a like an LMS software, right? And I have a lot of people say like, who should I use for hosting? Well, we want to be able to provide an environment that is tuned specifically for that LMS. So when somebody signs up and downloads and gets WordPress installed, like, well, they don't have to do that anymore. Like, we can handle all of that for them. So they click go, everything's pre-installed, pre-configured exactly how that developer wants it configured, or how that company wants, all these building blocks put together.
That's actually a very interesting solution, because I don't see that like only being an agency solution. But for example, if you own a platform plugin like Groundhog or LearnDash, Lifter LMS, or providing, one of the biggest issues that all of us face, any WordPress platform plugin developer, is where do we send our people for hosting? Who's got the best solution to best serve the needs of our customers? And it's such a fragmented experience. So you end up writing an article with like 10 different things. It'd be so nice to just talk to one hosting company that's like, we understand your plugin really well. Here is the stack, and we can even like brand it for you and all of this stuff. And I could be like, hey, listen, looking for a host, we have Groundhog hosting. That's a really unique solution for us developers who run those platforms.
I agree with you a little bit, Adrian, but remember, it was actually one of your friends. I was mentioning him. We'll have to have him back, but fortunately, I've forgotten his name. He lives in Toronto. He was in the startup community. Do you
Sunir?
Sunir. Can you remember what he was saying about his product and the I wouldn't say conflict, that would be too strong a word, but the tension between agency and app solutions. And
I don't think that necessarily applies for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about. Sunir has a very interesting solution that allows agencies to add their customers' credit card information to a fake kind of like pass-through credit card, which the agency can then use to go sign up for all of their different services. So whenever the client changes their credit card, they only have to change it in one place, and then it propagates through wherever they use the magical credit card that doesn't expire, which is a very cool and interesting solution for agencies that just avoids the whole like, we need you to go buy this or expense this or whatever. I don't think that necessarily applies, because for the developers using, or the developers like me who would want to be able to recommend a specific hosting company that best accomplishes the stack, not every single one of those customers is working with an agency, right? So actually only about 30% of them are.
Yeah.
So for the DIYers, it would make a lot of sense to send every single DIYer, which is still about 60% of the audience, to that specific purpose-built hosting company, while the other 30%, their agencies are already taking care of the conversation, so they would say, that's not for me anyway.
Well, I suppose I'm kind of looking at it at WP Tonic, because my vision for, but it probably won't be done this year because time is running out. We're almost halfway through 2020, and also we've had the virus and everything. But my vision for WP Tonic is provide a software stack that's been well tested, and provide a hosting solution that has been customized for a learning management solution, but then also provide a unique stack of themes or templates that have been purposely designed that you can buy individually, or you get part of the hosting plan, and then also a number of landing pages and automation emails and scripts that work with Groundhog that are purposely designed for somebody that has a coaching, learning management, course-based website. So we offer a lot of value for the person that is starting out. So we remove some of the frustrations of trying
we
to
got like 3 hosting companies on the call. We have 3 hosting companies on the call. We have our sponsor, we've got you, we've got Stephen.
Oh well, there we go. But it's a big industry, isn't it? We're talking about billions of users, You know, I don't know how many websites are hosted.
Yeah, but your solution, just to qualify, your solution is also a little bit different because we were talking earlier, you know, a lot of the hosting companies are like really fragmented, and what Steven's offering is for, you know, agencies to white label niche specific, right? And you're niche specific because you're offering the specific technology stack with optimized hosting for that specific stack, catering to people in the LMS industry. Yeah. I'm saying from a more general approach, like developers like myself, there's not currently specific dedicated hosting for Groundhog, and there's not specific dedicated hosting for a lot of the big WordPress plugin platforms out there. And it would be interesting to start to see that propagate. And obviously, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, but it's certainly an interesting possibility in the future.
All right. Yeah, oh, sorry, Stephen.
I was just going to say, yeah, exactly. Like if you want to launch groundhog.io hosting, you know, like we want to be there to help support that and make a tailored space for that. If WP Tonic wants to launch, you know, WP Tonic hosting, which I know you have, but like if you want like some custom tune servers for that exact sort of situation, like we want to be there to help create that for you and provide, you know, the white label dashboard, user management, the billing side of stuff. So that's where we're looking to go, because we've solved this kind of speed issue.
Because
more customer focused, but we want to help other people solve.
A lot of people wouldn't. There's some people wouldn't agree with this, but what I didn't want to do is go through the multi-site solution, because I found there's specific problems. I'm not going to take up a load of time. That's for another. Might be for somebody who's a multi-site expert to come on and explain what multi-site is, and we can have that discussion. But it's a great product, but it also, for the right solution, it's the right tool. But for sometimes it's used because it's the only thing out there at the present moment, and I found that it's not the right tool. So that's enough of me waffling. So, Stephen, how can people find out more about you and what you're up to for your company?
If you head over to zipfish.io, you can find out how we speed up websites and how we work on the server side of things and the code side of stuff to make sure those two are communicating and making your site as fast as possible.
And he's offered a great discount for the WP Tribe, which I'll make sure is in the show notes and very clearly positioned for you listeners and viewers. We'll be back next week. See you soon. Bye.